Born and raised in South Bronx, Rosa Clemente is the president of Know Thyself Productions, a community activist group that she founded. She also co-founded and coordinated the first National Hip Hop Convention, as well as Reach Hip Hop Coalition, which is a group dedicated to media justice. Rosa has sat on the board of Black Lives Matter, the National Priorities Project, the Brecht Forum, and the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, and has written for publications such as Ebony, the Crammer Magazine, the Black World Today, the Final Call, the App Magazine, and many more. In 2001, Rosa published an article titled, "Who is Black?" which inspired many discussions on Blackness and the Latinx culture. She's a graduate of the University of Albany and Cornell University, and is currently enrolled in the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of UMass Amherst.
Not only is Rosa a powerful speaker and activist, but she has also been involved in the political scene. She was part of the first ever two women of color ticket in the presidential election, running as the vice president in the Green Party for the 2008 election. Given her depth of experience in activism and bringing diversity and justice to mainstream media and public dialogue, we are sure she will bring valuable knowledge and insight into issues of justice, inclusion, and equity, and how to bring about change in the system. Her involvement in politics also will allow her to share a valuable perspective of the political landscape and address the unrest and anxieties as a result of the current election. We are very fortunate to have Rosa Clemente here with us today. Please join us in giving her a warm welcome.
Thank you, everybody. First, thank you for Laura for reaching out last year. When I started my If I Was President tour that I started last September, and actually this is my last week. I've been on tour now for 15 months all over the country. And I was supposed to be here last month, but I got sick. I never get sick like that, but I was very, very sick. And luckily we were able to reschedule, and I think what I would have said in October wouldn't matter, but there's so many things that are already out the window, just from this week's election of a fascist to be president of the United States. So I spoke the day after, or the next day after he was elected in Colorado. So this is my second time speaking. So I have to be like super honest. I'm not gonna sit here and lie to make people comfortable. The reality of Black and brown lives is complete uncomfortability in ways that my generation and others have not known. And I can't, and I've never been one to deal with white fragility, but I won't deal with it, period, at this point. 301 incidences of racism in 1 week that have been reported against African American, Latinx, Native people, Muslim people, and even white people, young white people who are now dealing with the anger that is being felt around this country. You know, people have to really think about what this presidency means and what a society says that we should accept it so that this could be normalized behavior once again in this country. Lynching was normal in this country. Enslavement was the norm in this country. The exploitation of brown labor was the norm of this country. And in fact, I would argue none of that has ever gone away. We could look at systems of mass incarceration, schools in African American Latinx communities that might as well, and they are the feeders to the prison system. And for every person of color right in this chapel right now, you have every right to be anxious and afraid about what's about to happen in this country. And anybody who tells you you don't, they're not on your side. And when I mean not on your side, they're not on the side of humanity. It doesn't matter that this person is the president. It's going to be your generation, younger generations like my daughter, and my generation of 40 to 50-year-olds that are going to say this is unacceptable. You already have people talking about unity. How do you have unity with someone who just appointed a white nationalist as his senior advisor, Steve Bannon? You need to know who these people are. If you're white, you need to know the white people Trump are putting in play that are apparently speaking for all white people. Because I know all white people don't think like this. I know all white people are not motivated by racism. But all that dormant psychic thing that you think you haven't had, you think you haven't been inundated sociologically and psychologically with racism, it is dormant. But it's not dormant right now. It's coming out in ways that your generation never thought would be possible. We're going from a black president to one supported by the KKK. This is not in your history books. This is not about the 1950s or the 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, 90s, too. This is about right now. There is not one person of color in this country. Maybe some of them who voted for Trump, but even they thought they were getting something different, right? That's why most people are so sick of both the parties. The Democratic Party, an utter failure in black and brown communities and poor communities throughout this country. But we got a megalomaniac in office right now. One that lied again and said, what incidences of racism are you talking about? I've only seen one. Right, because you live in a gold-gilded tower, and that's how you've always lived. And anybody from New York City like me knows what Trump was, who he is. He's a con artist, and unfortunately, as always in America, the intersection of race, gender, and the economy came to play in the worst way possible. All the intersections met in the worst way possible. There are LGBTQ people right now either getting married or queer folks that are afraid to come outside. LGBTQ suicide hotlines are over inundated. They're begging for volunteers. Queer people are not back in a closet or whatever that is. If they walk outside, their lives are literally in danger. In the rest of the country, I already heard incidences happening in so-called Western Massachusetts. I went to UMass Amherst. I have students already calling me from the campus about nooses hanging, swastikas, people using the N-word in Western Massachusetts, liberal Massachusetts. What's it like for people in Kansas, Arkansas, Georgia, Florida? What's it like for the other? And most all of us are now the other. And if you are with Donald Trump in any way, that's something you personally have to deal with yourself. But be very clear that you're on the side, again, of a fascist, white nationalist, xenophobic, misogynistic, patriarchal, does not care about the working class, and thinks climate change does not exist. That's who you're rolling with. And if your parents are rolling with them or anyone in your family, that's who they're rolling with. And what does that say about them? That doesn't say anything about us who are not with that. That says something about them. I have family who voted for Trump. They won't ever see me again. And I mean that sincerely. I mean that sincerely. That's where we're at right now. And some people are going to try to say this is not where we're at. We need more inclusion. We need more diversity. We need more representation. We need none of that. We need a complete overhaul of the system of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism, and a complete shift back to power the people when it comes to electoral politics. That's where we need to go. So, I was going to say, it's interesting, all the adults told you to put your phones away, and I was going to say, tweet and hashtag and Snapchat, and Instagram, you can do that afterwards. The hashtag I've been using through this tour is called If I Was President, but all my social media is at Rosa Clemente. And I understand the power of social media. You know how I understand it? As Dave Chappelle said, an internet troll became the president. What media consultants did he have? None. He had Twitter and $2.7 billion of free advertising from Fox, MSNBC, CNN, and Viacom. Do you know that when ratings started going up, the president of CBS said, Donald Trump won't be good for the country, but he's good for my stocks and my ratings, so we're going to keep him on. That's what CBS, the head, Les Moonves of CBS said. And CNN and even progressive MSNBC crying that night like they didn't help get him into office, like they didn't help normalize discussions about sexual assault against women. Why are we even having discussions about sexual assault against women? Especially when campuses and women and men, but mostly women on campuses, have changed that entire narrative in less than 4 years of what is acceptable and not acceptable. Think about that. So Fox News actually did his job. Their job was to get someone like him. You have to question all these other pundits and reporters, including the New York Times, that failed to do their basic job of journalism, which is investigative journalism, not sensationalism for ratings. But none of those people will understand what most of us in this room and outside this room go through economically. Hey, maybe some people in here, I don't know. I know a little bit about Concord Academy, but I don't generalize and think everybody up in here has money. Hey, in my community, I have money. Just by the privilege of having my college degrees, it puts me in another level of social economic status. But I don't know everybody's story in here. But I know for the most part, nobody's rolling up in here like Donald Trump's type of money, or that type of money. And what it means to live in a gilded bubble, in a gilded cage, literally to live in a gilded cage all your life. Jonathan Kozol says, radical teachers teach facts, good teachers teach ideas, great teachers teach how to think. And Bell Hooks says, make your home site a place of resistance. So I grew up in the South Bronx, the poorest congressional district to this day. When I was 9 years old, my parents moved us to Westchester County, the second richest suburb in the country to this day. Anybody from Westchester County? Where are you from? Yonkers? Okay. So I grew up in Elmsford, near White Plains and Greenville, right? So when I was going to school, my school might as well have been a private school. Very small, teachers definitely cared. We were able to do anything and everything, participate, school trips to around the world, clubs. I mean, just it was definitely utopic, right? And it wasn't until I went to college that I started first realizing, because everybody does not live like this. Even though my mom always took us back to the Bronx, to this day my dad still has his business and we still have family there. So I knew that there was something different between my cousins who were living in the Bronx and the way I was living my life, the schools I was going to, the fact that I could stay out till 2 in the morning and it wasn't a big deal. The fact that, I remember never seeing police. Never saw a police officer. Maybe once, because they were walking down the street. But police in my school? Never. Like, police stopping, frisking, and harassing? No, but my cousins were going through that. So I had some indication that things weren't completely equitable within even us as people of color, as these boys was, Puerto Rican people. And when I went into the State University of New York at Albany, and that first year I didn't do well, I didn't realize that part of why I was not doing well was because of the racism that I was dealing with on campus. So I was not used to white people who called me the N-word, or white girls accusing me of doing things that I wasn't doing. I wasn't used to that. My school was half white, half black, a couple of us Latino, a couple South Asian. And I'm sure there were incidences. I mean, there were incidences. The Central Park 5 loomed large in my life. But I didn't, so I had a different perspective. So while some of my friends on campuses were angry or whatever at that moment, I would be like, I don't even really pay attention to white folks like that. Because, I didn't grow up around that, per se, that type of attitude. But I had to quickly understand that it didn't matter at that moment that I, this black Puerto Rican girl who had grown up in Westchester County and gone to great schools and was middle class, to most of those white people, I was just another person of color who got into affirmative action, and who was poor, and who was on welfare, and who stole, and every stereotype you could think of, right? And I became so depressed, I almost failed out of school. And then when I went back the second year, I joined an organization, the Black Student Alliance. And then I joined other organizations. And then I changed my major from political science to Africana studies. And then I started taking intro to ethnic studies. Then I took my first intro to women's studies class. It's being exposed to all this information that I should have been exposed to, even growing up as a Puerto Rican. I didn't know anything about Puerto Rican history. I didn't know we were a colony, then I didn't understand why we were a colony. I began to understand why Puerto Ricans are American citizens, but I still thought I was Hispanic. Then I was told I was African. Then I was told I was black. Then I was told about Malcolm and Fannie Lou Hamer and Che Guevara and just being exposed to so many things. I got angry, why wasn't I went to a great school. Why was I never taught about myself? Why was I never taught about my history? And why was I always taught, if anything, my history seemed to be oppressive and something I wanted to get away from? Why wasn't I taught about resistance? Why wasn't I taught about social justice movements? Why wasn't I taught that all white feminists were not racist? Well, this campaign surely showed 52% of white women voted being white over being a woman. 52% of white women voted for Donald Trump. I'm sure feminists are going to have a field day analyzing that demographic for the next decade. See, there's always been this kind of thing in social justice, right? White feminists get it. Well, hey, some white women were the ones ironing the cloth while their husband went and then put the KKK cloth out there. Or some of these white women have been the ones that were being abusive to domestic workers. Hey, there's white women in the KKK and who are skinheads. But I was exposed to so many ideas. And then being coupled with, at that time, our administrators really believing that part of their job was to make us leaders, to make us be intellectually rigorous, curious, and innovative in our ideas. And then at that time, hip-hop as a culture, not just the rap music, but hip-hop as a culture was growing in terms of how people were using the culture of hip-hop. Started where I grew up, where I was born in the South Bronx, to not only talk about the most marginalized people, but to understand the history of resistance and then be advocates for change. One of the most important things, though, in college was, again, this idea of critical thinking and also becoming a challenger to everything I had learned before. And what I did learn from the beginning of becoming a Black Studies major, and I guess for a lack of a better term, basically being turned down by my people and my history, was that Black and brown people in this country were not meant to survive. How were we meant to survive slavery, enslavement, the Middle Passage, colonialism, imperialism, genocide, apartheid, Jim Crow? We weren't meant to survive any of that. Immigrants weren't meant to survive coming here and making it. And Native people were surely not meant to survive at all. Social justice movements weren't meant to survive the counterintelligence program, the House Un-American Activities Committee. My generation that grew up under Ronald Reagan wasn't meant to survive mass incarceration. Many are not meant to survive immigrant detention complexes. Programs like Operation Streamline, immigration legislation, which obviously almost always turns out to anti-Latinx legislation. See, we weren't meant to survive any of that, and we have survived it, and we've thrived. And no matter what hurdles have come up, we, a little bit, have conquered them, or we wouldn't be here. See, and for over 20 years, I've always been told by family, my parents, who now they get it, but for a long time they didn't. They got the politic and the idea, they didn't like the fact that I was putting myself out there to say this. But what I'm saying is nothing new. But people would say, you can't do that, you have to stop confronting, you can't speak out, you can't be honest, you won't have a job, you won't get a house. And the crazy thing is, that was never my goal in going to college. My goal in going to college was to educate myself to a level to be so politically astute that I'm going to create my own path. And if I decide to keep going to school, which I did by going to Cornell and now finishing my PhD at UMass Amherst, I'm doing it on my choice, but also because I have the ultimate responsibility for everything that I've been taught and given to be part of a community and change the conditions that people are in. I didn't go to college to get a job in a nice house. In fact, that dream doesn't really exist for most people, even if you go to college at this point, with the economy the way it is. That dream does not exist for most people, period. This is the anxiety that many of those white people that voted for Obama twice, but then voted for Donald Trump are feeling. And in general, no leader has been speaking to that angst, including Bernie Sanders. You've been in the Senate for 35 years. Now you're speaking, you took a little bit of what you're talking about from the Green Party anyway. You say you're an independent, but you run as a Democrat. You get millennials hyped. You know that they're stealing the primary from you, and you still support the worst candidate that they could have put up. And you still let down millions of supporters. Hey, at the end, Bernie has 3 houses. He doesn't have to worry about paying rent or a student loan. He could care about it, but not enough to go against the grain. Man, what what if he did run as an independent? I'm a Green Party, so I voted, and I rode with the Green Party 100%. But man, what if he did run as an independent? Think about that. The same people that voted for Trump would have voted for Bernie, and one thing we know is Bernie's not a white supremacist, patriarchal megalomaniac like Trump is. We know Bernie would have listened if the movements kept pushing him. He's in a bad position right now. But you know what? He's old enough to have made the right decision for the rest of the people, particularly young people. But what you've also seen with this election is in the last couple of years, let's start before Ferguson. When George Zimmerman is acquitted of killing Trayvon Martin, a new generation of African American and Latinx and other people of color, young people, who have been raised like white young people under this false narrative of a post-racial society, woke up in a way. Or a collective consciousness was awakened, not woke up, but a collective consciousness. Many of those young folks of color did believe that George Zimmerman would get acquitted. Some of us who are a little older are like, what system are you looking at? People don't go to jail for killing black young unarmed men. The only people who go to jail for killing black men are other black men. First, all crime is interracial, but I've been in enough courtrooms to see who goes to jail for killing black people. And it's never the state or a vigilante like George Zimmerman. But that moment is the moment that the hashtag Black Lives Matter is created by Opal, Patrice, and Alicia. But it's another year before we see the rebellion in Ferguson. And why Ferguson was different than any other rebellion we have seen in the last 10 or 15 years, Ferguson is a small place where people have been used to police brutality, but coupled with that, the complete devastation of the public school system via the Teach for America program and charter schools. You have a lot of young people in Ferguson that were already marginalized before Mike Brown was murdered. What people forget is that Mike Brown's body laid out there for 4.5 hours for everybody in that community to see him dead. Mike Brown was 2 days away from going to college. And the power of social media, as well, a new generation of young people that were homeless, queer, mostly women, putting their bodies on the front lines of those tanks. And for a younger generation, you have not seen tanks in the streets. For most of us, we've seen tanks in documentaries of the 60s, right? But you didn't see tanks in the street of Ferguson. And if you think you would ever see tanks, you think it'd be in a big city, New York, LA. No, because post 9/11, every police department in this country has been militarized. You have some of the smallest police forces that have MRAPs now. They have military-style weaponry to fight against terrorism. But what you did is you fought against your own people. And then the other reason Ferguson was different was that wasn't a city run by Republicans. That was a city run by I was doing an interview and somebody said, but they're burning down the store. So you care more about a store than justice? You care more about a CVS burning down than justice? How long are young people supposed to take a killing every 28 hours at the hands of the state? How long are young people of color who've been marginalized, who've been pushed out of school, supposed to take it? How long does an 80% black youth unemployment number become it becomes untenable at that point for that community? And since Ferguson, there have been hundreds, almost 1,000 more police shootings in this country. And in fact, this week, the jury deadlocked on the officer that shot Sam Du Bois in the head in Cincinnati last year. This police officer was wearing a Confederate flag shirt underneath his uniform when he shot Sam Du Bois in the head. And the jury deadlocked. And in the same week, Dylan Roof, who killed all those people in that South Carolina church, he's about to be declared mentally incompetent. There is no justice in the justice system when the state particularly takes a black life. And people are seeing this consistently. It has not ever been some form of justice within that. And that's the essence of why we're in the historical era that we're in, or the people will call it the Black Lives Matter historical era, or some historians will call it that. But even with Black Lives Matter, right, I think it's very interesting that under a black president, you have to have people say Black Lives Matter. Under a black president. But this is the same president who created the deportation machine that Trump is about to take to the levels that people have not seen. There's an excellent article in The Nation called by Carlos Garcia and Marissa Franco, who were part of the team that finally got Joe Arpaio, the sheriff of Arizona, out of there. And they wrote an article called The Deportation Machine That Obama Built for Trump. Because President Obama has deported more people than George Bush did in his 8 years. President Obama took deportation forces from 750 to 3,600. He built that machine for Trump now to take to levels. And Trump is very serious about that. He's very serious about completely instituting raids and using federal databases to find all undocumented people and literally round them up. And look, as much as I've never seen that. Well, I've seen it in documentaries about the rise of the Third Reich in Nazi Germany. I've never seen that here, but that's where we're headed. And I think part of what Van Jones called the white lash is not only that, right? It's also a backlash against the growing social justice movements of our time. Not just look, if you don't care about race, which I don't even understand how that's possible, let's talk about sexuality and gender and non-gender conforming people. How much has been done just in the last 4 years? Not just on legislation, which is important, but on what is acceptable or not acceptable in our institutions. All of that's about to be rolled back. Do you know who Mike Pence is? No. Listen to when he had a radio show. Trump is almost like the puppet when you look at who he's about to appoint to this cabinet, his cabinet. Mike Pence is the vice president. You want to talk about right-wing, evangelical, whatever, that's him. He wants to make Sarah Palin the Secretary of the Interior because you're going to care so much about the environment. Rudy Giuliani, I grew up under Giuliani time in New York. The Attorney General or Secretary of State, Rudy Giuliani wants to implement stop and frisk nationwide, starting now with Muslims. Nationwide. All that takes is an executive order. Newt Gingrich, who said that the jobs we should be preparing young black boys for are janitor positions and they should start doing that in middle school. Like being trained to be just janitors. Hey, my husband's a janitor, so I got mad love for anybody who's a service worker. But Newt Gingrich isn't saying that out of love for us. Chris Christie, age just got convicted of one of the largest political scandals. Sheriff Clark, the black sheriff from Wisconsin, that basically says any black man is a potential thug and that's how he should be treated. Jeff Sessions. We're talking about people that literally, most of their career has been based on one definite hate against any non-gender conforming person, any LGBTQ person. Imagine being Muslim, LGBTQ, and undocumented at this time. Just imagine that at this time. That's some of the people he wants to appoint to his cabinet. And what checks and balances? The Republican Party runs everything. Hopefully Ruth Bader Ginsburg stays on that court, man. God, give her 8 years, 4 to 8, man. You know she was about to retire. She's not retiring now. This is the only thing stopping a complete takeover. And you know what? The two easiest things this administration will do will be deportation and destroying the last remnants of Roe versus Wade. If they could get 52% of white women to vote for Donald Trump, every person in here who is a woman, identifies as a woman, better be ready for the complete destruction of Roe v. Wade. And what that means for reproductive rights, but actually our right to exist, period. That's where we're at. So the only way we get out of this right now, Saul Williams, a great poet, tweeted the other night, "When the past awakened, I learned that it was I who had been asleep." Right? And I said, let me just take a real quick look at Donald Trump's first 100 days. And I saw the article on NPR, just so we're clear. First, propose a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on all members of Congress. Fine. Second, a hiring freeze on all federal employees. Third, for every new federal regulation, 2 existing regulations must be eliminated. Fourth, a 5-year ban on White House and congressional officials becoming lobbyists. There should be a lifetime ban on that. A complete ban on foreign lobbyists raising money for American elections. See, and this is the technology of all this. Some people would be, I agree, there should be term limits, and there should be bans on lobbyists. But then his following 7 actions to protect American workers. First, I will announce my intention to renegotiate NAFTA. Second, announce I'll withdraw from TPP. Third, direct my Secretary of the Treasury to label China a currency manipulator. Fourth, all foreign trade abuses that unfairly impact American workers and direct them to use every tool under American and international law. Fifth, I will lift the restrictions on the production of $50 trillion worth of job-producing energy reserves, including shale, oil, natural gas, and clean coal. There's no such thing as clean coal. Six, I will lift the Obama-Clinton roadblocks and allow the Keystone Pipeline to move forward, as well as support the Dakota Access Pipeline. 7, cancel billions in payments to UN climate change and withdraw from all previous UN climate change agreements. First, cancel every unconstitutional executive order, beginning with DACA. Second, begin the process of selecting a replacement for Scalia. Third, cancel all federal funding to sanctuary cities. Fourth, begin the removal of more than 3 million illegal immigrants. Fifth, suspend immigration from all regions where vetting cannot safely occur. Right, And then he goes on about school choice and more charter schools, and obviously complete repeal and replace of Obamacare, and the building of the wall, and the trillions of dollars on security. And lastly, he pledges to restore law and order. And if you are a historian, a sociologist, if you live in communities that I come from, law and order usually means keep black people in check, however you have to do that. And that's going to be done through more racial surveillance and racial control. So Saul says, when the past awakened, I learned that I was I who had been asleep. So look, this is what I've been saying. First of all, one of the key organizers, he's also a hip-hop artist called Tefco from Ferguson, said last year, black and brown folks already live in Donald Trump's America. And I think he was correct when he said that. But now we all live in that America. What happened last week was white nationalism on fleek, once again codified as the norm in this country. The soon-to-be white minority is grasping on the empire as they recognize that people of color will soon be the majority. But it doesn't matter if we're the majority. This country could very well look like an apartheid South Africa. That's exactly where we're heading. So when I hear President Obama and Hillary Clinton and Oprah Winfrey talk about we're rooting for Donald Trump's success, I'm rooting for his utter failure and demise, straight up. I said it, and I'll live with it. I'm rooting for his utter failure. Because his progress is on the backs of most of us. That's not progress. That's authority, and that's dictatorship. And I'm not willing to go down there. At least I'm not willing to do it willingly. Black and brown people have also been complicit. We've been subjected with the lesser of two evils, and most of us still supported the duopoly that before Trump brought people like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. We also need to look at ourselves. All over the world, anti-blackness and anti-migrant fervor is rampant. This is not just here. What is happening in Brussels, in Germany, in France, Brexit? All of that was based on what? The fear of migrants. Migrants from where? The North Africa, from the Middle East. And why? Why? Why is Syria the way it is? Why is Libya the way it is? The United States had a hand in all of that. The United States policies has a hand in creating ISIS and all of that. They don't want you to think beyond the borders of the United States. But we got to think beyond now. We got to think what this presidency just doesn't mean for us here. What does it mean for the rest of the world? Where 1 billion people already don't have clean water. What does it mean when Flint, Michigan is poisoned by its own elected officials in America? What does it mean that the water protectors in North Dakota are saying, listen, you might not be rolling with us, but believe me, if we don't stop this pipeline, over 17 million people will be affected and have no clean water. Why is your generation going to have to fight for clean water and air to breathe? You don't care about anything else. Care about the climate, because the climate sees nothing but what? Has to refix itself. The climate's not going to care if you're white, black, Latino. It's not going to care if you're in Florida, if you're in Kansas or in Oklahoma. Climate crisis that we're in right now is going to affect every single one. And no amount of money is going to save anybody from that. We have to think about these things. You're in a good institution where you're being taught to think and be intellectuals, but also you now have to be part of this fight. You have to use every skill set you are gaining here to benefit humanity. You have to become an organizer and activist. This is your generation's calling right now. This is your generation's calling right now. So, I don't consent to this government. I plan on being ungovernable as, and y'all know what I'm saying, I don't have to say it. Ungovernable as, that's my plan. His cabinet looks like a modern day Third Reich for many people in this country. I don't consent to that. You need to organize. You need to join an organization. You need to support a radically black and brown-led organization. White people have to join organizations like Standing Up for Racial Justice. I don't want to see one white person wearing a safety pin. In fact, I saw one last night, and she's a very nice woman, and I had to tell her, don't come to me with that safety pin. No. I want to see that. Those are symbolic gestures. We don't need any more white allies. We need white accomplices for justice. White people got to put their bodies on their line and have these conversations in their communities, man. You got to talk to your cousin who voted. Or maybe be like me. I ain't talking no things, I'm not doing it. And that's okay. Because I see too many young white people this last week devastated and upset. Because I refuse to believe a new generation wasn't making some progress towards how we even communicate and be with each other. But I also know too many black and brown young people in institutions like this, at Cornell, and the highest levels of education that have been feeling oppressed and repressed and been told to shut up and been told to think that everything they're thinking is not valid, who have not been affirmed. I've met too many Muslim people who are struggling with their own anti-blackness. I've seen Asians struggling with their anti-blackness and doing good work to root it out. If you're white, you need to be in the tradition of John Brown and David Gilbert and Students for Democratic Society and the Weather Underground. But you have to be accomplices for justice. So I don't consent. I don't give him a chance. I wouldn't give Reagan a chance to be president again. I wouldn't give George Bush a chance. Somebody, or a friend of mine tweeted, when your chief strategist is a proud white nationalist, your chief strategy will be white nationalism. And that's where we're at. So I'm going to end, listen, like I said, feel free, because I know it takes time to process a lot of this, right? And I don't operate from a center of anger in any of the work I do. But I operate from passion. And I operate with thinking about my 11-year-old daughter. A black Puerto Rican child that is very clear, more clear than a lot of adults I knew, that Donald Trump would be a disaster. But whoever was the president, that she was going to be in the streets organizing for what the people want, right? And now more than ever, that's what we need. But we do need people to say, no, never Trump. No, we won't consent. Yes, we will be ungovernable, and yes, we will be in the streets. The state and its actors want us to march to our deaths willingly and peacefully. I won't do it, and I know too many people that will not do it. We will resist at every point. We do not consent. We will become ungovernable. We will resist at every point. We do not consent. We will become ungovernable. Frederick Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. This is a struggle right now. I invite you to be part of it. It's beautiful. I invite you to be part of organizing and activism and social justice work. I invite you to use every skill set that you have, not to just ensure that Black Lives Matter or that social racial justice matter, that economic and gender justice matter. But I'll tell you one thing. When black and brown people are free, we will all be free. And we need to start from this moment completely dedicated to that. We don't have time to play games. So I hope that you use whatever you have to fight against what we are going through right now. And I hope that some of you do go to inauguration and raise your voices, raise your power fists, use your feet, use your voices, use your skills. We do not consent to this. We cannot consent to this. Thank you very much.